Michelle Marie McGrath. Welcome to Unclassified Woman, and today I'm delighted to be talking to Justine Brooks Froelker. Justine's a licensed professional counsellor and a certified Daring Way facilitator based on the research of Brené Brown. She has a private practice in St. Louis, Missouri. She's the author of the book and blog Ever Upward and an advocate for breaking the shamed silence surrounding infertility, loss and recovery. She also writes for St. Louis Health and Wellness magazine, the Huffington Post, and appears regularly on the midday television show Great Day St. Louis. You can find out more about Justine and her work at everupward.org. Justine, so great to speak to you today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And so, just to start us off, would you mind sharing a little bit about whether you've not had a child due to personal choice or through circumstances?
I am child-free, not by choice, or what I call child-full mother. We tried to have kids via gestational surrogacy, and it did not work out for us. And we knew adoption was not right for our family. And so we live a child-full life by finding many other ways to parent.
Yeah, and I remember reading on something that you wrote about how a lot of people would just then say, well, why don't you just adopt? Like it's a really easy thing to do.
Yeah, I get that. Those words are actually on the back copy of my book. Why don't you just adopt, or when are you having kids? And so I think I get that saying, or that question quite a bit, because I think people are really uncomfortable. My story is sad. And so it makes them a bit uncomfortable, which I totally get. And we don't like to be in discomfort, and we don't like to be vulnerable. And so rather than meeting me where I'm at in the sadness and the loss and trying to redefine my life, they quickly want to fix it by offering really the not so simple solution of adoption, because I think there's also a lot of misconceptions about adoption. And so not only is it invalidating to the journey that I've already been through, but it's also pretty minimizing to the arduous path of adoption.
Yeah, because I don't think that's not something that's a straightforward process, is it?
Exactly. And I think, that was something that our families also had to kind of, when we decided not to stop infertility treatments and to not move forward with adoption, that's also a huge loss for our family, but also to be able to explain to our family that there's many reasons why we know adoption's not right for us, but when you sign on for the journey of adoption, you're signing on to a lot more money, which we had already spent quite a bit of money, and also probably a very long time and several more losses before your family's really solidified, because there's a lot of loss in the adoption journey too for a lot of families before your family is complete and all of that stuff. And so there's loss in all of it, and that just makes really people uncomfortable, so they'd rather fix it.
Yeah, and so was there a grieving process that you went through then when you finally came to that point of going, okay, this is just not going to be a part of our lives moving forward. We're not going to have our own child?
Oh, yeah. Grief is one tricky SOB. I think, I just finished Brené Brown's new book, Rising Strong. I'm certified in her work, so I'm training on the Rising Strong process. And so she, in one of her end notes, is about complicated grief. And I definitely think that infertility and childlessness or child-free, not by choice, is part of that category. It's also part of what some people call disenfranchised grief that's not really acknowledged by most of society, or it's not easily understood. And what I've lived through at this point, we're now about 3 years out of ending our journey. And what I know for sure is that this is a lifelong process. And I think what I've learned too, as a mental health therapist, I understand grief. I've been trained on it. I've worked with clients through the grief process and things like that, but nothing has ever really had me look at it cold in the face that this, no matter what the loss is, I think it does last for a very long time. It comes in waves and it changes, but it's a lifelong loss, especially when it comes to not having the kids that we really wanted to have and the kids that we dreamed of having and spent a lot of money to have. And We did have embryos, so we considered those to be our children. They were our genetic makeup, and they never got to, take a breath of this earth's fresh air, is what I say. And so I have to find ways to parent them from here.
Yeah. And so what's helped you the most in trying to navigate through that process? And like you say, it's really a lifelong thing, but what do you find that supports you?
Well, there's quite the list. I definitely reaching out, seeking support. I have my own therapist that I work with. The blogging community and other writers have been very, very helpful because they get the whole journey. I think speaking my story, writing is probably number one. I don't think silence helps this at all. I don't think silence helps anything that we struggle with. And so it doesn't mean that you have to write the book or the blog, but I do think to be able to share our story and our truth with ones that we trust and who have earned the right is a really important part of the process. Another big thing that I'm a huge advocate of, and it's a big part of my private practice and my blog, is self-care. So really practicing good self-care, which for me includes reading every day, writing every day, coloring, meditation, exercise, drinking enough water, getting enough sleep, all of those basics that unfortunately not many of us are making time for.
Yeah. Were you confronted with any surprising responses through this process by any of your own family or friends? Did you find all of them very supportive? Because I know often it's the people that are closest to us, they think they're being helpful, but often they can be sometimes the most challenging people to deal with when we're going through a big life experience like that.
Right, right. It's funny. One of the most commented on chapters in the book and ever upward is chapter 5, evolving relationships. And I talk about two of my relationships that were honestly decent casualties of the journey and how much, I changed, I guess, throughout the journey, or they just didn't get it. And I think, and what I came up with in that chapter, and I've actually published it on the Huffington Post too, is kind of categories of relationships, because it really did, going through a journey like infertility really makes it's either going to really nourish relationships or it's going to destroy them, I think. And a lot of that is in our own hands and in doing the work. And so I kind of found out that I have what I call fellow warriors. So people that get it, even if they've never been through the journey, they somehow get it. They have the gift of empathy, or they work really hard at empathy versus giving me sympathy. Or maybe they too have struggled with trying to make their family and things like that. But then I also had those true supporters, and that even includes some of our closest family and friends of, they don't get it. They've never really had to think about having kids. They don't really have to think about not having kids, and they can't really struggle in putting themselves in our shoes, but they will do anything and everything for us and love us through it. But then there's, of course, all those people that just, they don't get it and then therefore don't even try.
Yeah.
I really found the difficult ones were the people that didn't acknowledge it at all. I felt not even just not in asking about it, but not even really in acknowledging the grief process, or that certain days might be hard. Even when I do ask for help, it was that kind of active denial of the journey that we had been through. And infertility, especially infertility that didn't end the way it's supposed to, or the way our society wants it to, with a happy bouncing baby and 2.5 kids, makes really, people are pretty judgy of that. And it already feels really invisible. So then when you have your loved ones who deny it also, it's just that relationship suffers.
In our society, we just do not deal with grief and loss at all. And you either have, people who are going to complete denial and completely ignore it, would not raise that with you at all, or like the other extreme, where it's kind of like they may even sort of blow it out of proportion and make it worse. Or
Right.
It just seems to be these extremes. We don't have those rituals and ways that they do in other societies and cultures, where they really acknowledge that it's the next phase of a journey when somebody transitions, and they honor it. And we don't deal with it well at all, do we? Like our Western society, any of those experiences. People go into this panic of thinking, I'm either I don't know what to say, or I'm going to say the wrong thing, in inverted commas. And so they just don't know how to deal with it.
They really do. And I think what people get tripped up on is they get tripped on, I just can't imagine. I've never been through that. And that's the difference between empathy and sympathy. Empathy, to experience empathy with me, you don't have to have lost 3 babies and then have to live a childless life. You just have to know what it's like to lose a dream, to be sad, to go through trauma or tragedy or loss and grief, or be angry. And we've all had those emotions, which means you can do empathy with me, but it requires you to be vulnerable. And that's what's really scary for people. And that's all of Brené's work. That's why I'm so drawn to Brené's work, especially through this journey of infertility. It's really just kind of strengthened my messages.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, all of her stuff is fantastic. I got her Rising Strong book the other day, but I've not started it yet.
Oh, it's so good. It's her best stuff yet. It's amazing.
Fantastic. The problem that we have with people struggling with those experiences so much and how to relate is because one of the myths of our society is, being a mother should be the central driving part of being a woman, and this is what we're conditioned to believe. And so if you don't fit into that category or into that box, sometimes people don't know how to treat you or deal with you, even though, as we know, it's not the role of every woman to be a mother.
Absolutely. And I think that's because, a woman, we're more nurturing, so therefore we must mother. And I think, okay, that's a stereotype, but it does tend to be nurturing. But there are lots of ways to practice nurturing. I'm working on the sequel to Ever Upward, and the sequel in Ever Upward is about how I have found unexpected parenting roles, because there's lots of ways for mothering, and nurturing is definitely one of my core personality traits, core values. And so I just don't happen to get to do it on my own children. So I have to find other ways to parent. But that's not the truth for every woman.
Yeah.
But our society likes to really box us in.
Absolutely. And so how would you say you're able to express your nurturing and those caring, mothering qualities in other parts of your life?
Well, I definitely, I mother my clients. I'm a mental health therapist, and a lot of therapy is reparenting. And so I definitely find an outlet through that. I have my dogs, my pets. I'm raising Monarch butterflies, which is crazy and sounds weird, but it's quite the process raising them from egg all the way to butterfly. And the other biggest way that I parent or I choose to mother is by being really involved in all the kids' lives, in our lives. So like our nephew, all of our friends' kids, like I call them my chosen children. And so, we have a playroom at our house. We have a pool so they can come and swim and up with us. And when we bought this house after our journey ended, I was very frank that like, I want the pool because one, I don't want to be left behind. Your kids are going to grow up and they're not going to want to hang out with the pool. They might, but also like, it was that way for us to really have active roles in all the kids' lives of, like you need a break from mom and dad, or you need to talk to us about something, you can come to us. And I want to be that person for you. And so one's not better than the other, and it's not a consolation prize. But, I once had a colleague say to me, she goes, if I'm honest with myself, I have more influential relationships with my niece and nephew than I do with my own children. And you get to do that for the rest of your life. And I looked at her and I said, you're right. But would I trade that to be a mom? Yes. One's not better than the other. They're just different.
Yeah, just different experiences. And you've just reminded me of one of those sayings that we hear a lot of, you don't know real love until you've had a child. And it's like, well, your deepest experience of love and your experience with that is your experience. We can't really compare what that's like for each person. Every person would experience different forms of love and different connections with different people. So how can we say that someone's connection with their partner is, not as significant as a completely different person's relationship with their child? Like there's we can't compare any of it.
Right. Absolutely. There's a the Today Show blog, they always have a weekly challenge, and one was like, stop mom judging. And so I submitted to it. I mean, it hasn't been published or anything yet, but I submitted to that, like, you don't know true love. And so I wrote a piece about that. I kind of reworked an old piece because you don't know how one loves. No one, we've been trying to study love forever at this point, and it's one of those things that's very hard to nail down. But that is one of definitely the comments that I think it's kind of a real hard dig for a lot of us that don't have children, no matter how we came to that circumstance. I think that's just not a fair judgment at all.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking, I love the idea that you've got monarch butterflies, and how obviously the butterfly is a symbol of transformation, and how you're having that real living metaphor in your life of observing them going, through that process of growth.
Yeah, it's been, well, and we really just stumbled upon it. On 4th of July, we witnessed a monarch butterfly lay her eggs in our garden. And we had built the garden specifically for monarchs because there's so and then I just kind of started researching, and we brought them inside because it does increase their chances of surviving, obviously. And so I've actually, the butterfly doesn't get quite as much credit as I think it deserves after raising them. And so it actually inspired me. Well, and it was funny, actually. She has 3 boys, and she came over and she goes, Justine, they poop a lot. I'm like, I know. And she goes, is that caterpillar poop on your counter? And I was like, oh. And she goes, that's when you know you're a mom. There's shit on your counter and you don't even care. And I was like, exactly. And so, but like through this whole process of these monarchs, and you let them go, it has been the perfect metaphor for life and struggle, and for the mothering part of who I am. So much that I actually, within hopefully, I just wrote an adult coloring book, which it's a journal. So it's an adult coloring book / journal based on the life cycle. I just couldn't get over the metaphor of how much, I honestly think monarchs are here to remind us of that we can do this life, and that we're meant to grow and change and transform.
Amazing. And I love the idea of the journal as well, and using that sort of metaphor as part of that process. Brilliant. It just sounds ideal. And so, obviously, meaning and purpose come in many different ways for all of us. And, some people really find meaning and fulfillment through that process of having a child. But obviously, if that's not meant to be for each person, as we know it's not, what would you say brings you a deep sense of meaning and purpose? Obviously, through your work that you're doing.
Yeah, it's through my work for sure. I think it's through relationship. I'm actually doing a new series on the blog next week. I'm just doing I'm posting every day next week I'm kind of redefining hope. I'm calling it When Hope Grows Up, and it's just short bursts of ideas for 5 days in a row. And I'm ending it on this idea of kind of, that meaning and purpose, but more so that I believe that we get to choose our legacy. That's something that I hear when someone's really, really struggling, especially when they get the news that biological children are not an option for them. What's my legacy going to be? Good God, if I don't have if the only way I get a legacy is through biological children, then I'm screwed. And so I refuse to believe that. I choose my legacy. My legacy is my relationships, and how I simply change someone's life by being even the tiniest part of it, because we're all connected. That's our legacy. That's our meaning and purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what advice would you give to somebody who's experiencing infertility and they're now realizing that they need to focus their energy elsewhere to create meaning for them after they'd been really attached to that idea of having a family?
Right. I think the biggest one is you are the only one that knows what is right for your family. Whether or not it's decisions based on financial capability, emotional capability, what your marriage or relationship can take, whatever. Like only we know what is enough, what I call our enoughs and everythings. For us, we thought it was only one round. When we lost those two babies, it was crushing. We took a loan out the next day for the second round. That's all we could afford. We couldn't even really afford that, but we did it. For other couples, it's 10 years of trying. The only ones that know our truth. But what I think we have to really do the work of is to make sure that we're not getting tripped up on that it has to only have one, that we're going above and beyond our means financially and emotionally for something that may just not be within our grasp. I think it's okay. Enough is enough, and to let go and redefine. That's not what we're going to hear from our infertility clinics, and it's not what we're going to hear from society at all. But I think that's something we have to do. And the way we find that truth and clarity is through speaking our story. We cannot do this ourselves and with only our partner or spouse as our only support. You have to seek outside help. I don't think the infertility clinics are enough. I do think seeking therapy, if needed, is beneficial for all of us. Life is just too difficult, especially going through the infertility journey. But the other big thing too is like it can't be everything. It's one of your gifts, but it can't be your everything. That's why I have so many moms in my office that are lost and depleted, because it can't be your everything. So your journey to become a mom also can't be your everything.
Yeah. But some people do become very obsessed with it and very fixated on it, don't they?
It's hard not to. I was working with a client right now, and she's like, I just feel like I can't make it. Well, when it comes to infertility, it's not like we get drunk, have sex, and get pregnant. Every step comes with a waiting game. Every multiple what ifs and statistics and decisions. And so it takes that luxury away.
Yeah, and especially, like you mentioned, it's such an expensive process financially as well as, emotionally and all the other levels.
Yep.
Very difficult. And so one of the definitions of the phrase to mother means to produce, which I absolutely love, because when we consider that we're mothering and creating in other ways, then it also, it's a reminder that we're always producing in some way in our life. So what else would you like to produce?
Well, I think I want to produce change and connection, I guess, whether or not it's through my writing or my private practice, building the brand of Ever Upward. I mean, I do hope that this is multiple projects for me and speaking engagements, but I want to produce a change in the conversation, especially in the infertility world for sure, and in recovery and in loss. And we do that through connection ultimately, I think. And that's one of the biggest things when I think of to produce, one of the biggest comments I get back on the book or the blog is that, but you're doing so good, and like you're on Huffington Post and you're on, local TV every month and things like that. And it's like, but I'm still beating my head up against a wall in a topic that no one wants to talk about.
Yeah.
And not many people understand, despite that there are millions of us. And so I keep producing because something I produce is going to break through and get people to have that, okay, what's this about? Like, why are we struggling so much and things like that? And so whether or not it's a coloring book or the sequel to Ever Upward or the YouTube channel or something like that, that's one, how I parent the world, because that's how I mother. And two, I will change this conversation.
Where people are so uncomfortable with it. And I've found, even just through people I've been speaking to about the nature of this podcast series, I was talking about women who are not having children for a whole variety of different reasons. Right. And I can see that some people are just uncomfortable talking about it, because until they're in that position whereby it might be something that they're really trying for and it's not happened, for obviously there's a myriad of reasons why that may be, it's just not something that they really consider. Or even want to consider, because they might, it's just something that's not even entered their head. And you can see the kind of incomprehension that sort of can arise, or like they haven't even considered that they won't have a child or that it might not happen because they're just assuming it's going to be part of their journey. As women, we are limited to a window of time for that, whereas for men, obviously, it can go on a lot longer.
Right.
That
I
they're
know it would be nice if our fertility caught up with our lifestyle, wouldn't it?
I mean,
really nice if someone would figure that out.
I know. I mean, so there's just for women, there are so many. There is a finite window of opportunity. Whether even though we are a rapidly expanding population, it doesn't mean that we can necessarily have them later on. And I know that our media focuses very much on women who are having children later on. But the reality is, if you actually look at the statistics and the figures, it's still a very small percentage.
It's a very small percentage. And the women that the media focus on are women who have many, many resources.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Versus the average.
Exactly. And so it gives this very unrealistic perception, I feel. And I was talking to Jodie Day about this, and, she was saying it's the myth of the miracle baby. Often you're only getting a very small fraction of the story. So it's not necessarily, it may not even be their eggs or whatever, but of course, often in these kind of stories, they're not sharing all of that kind of detail.
Yep, absolutely. I think too, there's also, it is just the wide-ranging assumption too that every woman wants to be a mom, and that's not true. That's not the truth either. And so like we do a disservice to women when we pigeonhole them like that. I have a friend that she grew up and she's never really wanted kids, never her whole life, and then she actually by another circumstance found out that it wasn't even possible, and there was this whole new stage of grief.
Yeah.
When you're told that you can't, that's way different than, well, I don't want them anyways. And there's this whole different process of like, well, crap, maybe I did want them.
Yeah.
And so like that, there's lots of those stories too.
It adds a very different dynamic when a choice is taken away from you, doesn't it? So it's a very different experience. I've heard of that, quite frequently afterwards, and just recently where women will say, well, I just thought I wasn't really that sure, but then like that, then they find out that they can't anyway. And then of course that can be quite a shock to then navigate through.
Right.
So
right.
What would you feel?
It's very complicated.
It really is, isn't it? And this is why the stereotypes and these kind of outdated beliefs are just so unhelpful, because each woman's story is so unique to her. And just all these different sets of circumstances, they make these generalizations quite redundant. I always feel as though a lot of the terms that we use, like child-free, childless, none of them to me really adequately describe like what's going on, or the uniqueness of each person's situation. I really like that phrase childful. Like I first heard that from Melanie Notkin,
yes,
the author of Motherhood and Savvy Auntie and stuff, and I really like that expression. But I suppose, look, as time goes on, our language will evolve, I guess, on this whole topic. But nothing really feels as though it's quite the right description, does it?
Right. No, it doesn't. Because, as a woman that tried to have kids and wanted to have kids, I'm often put into that category of childless. And I really struggled with that term. I'm not less of a woman because I cannot be a mother. And so and yet child-free, especially at the beginning parts of our journey when we were really, letting go of this dream, didn't quite either. Child-free didn't quite feel like it described us right either. And like child-free, not by choice. Okay,
so taking all of that into account, Justine, what would you feel are the major benefits that you're experiencing in not having children, if you would call it that?
Yeah, it's weird. There are definitely moments that and days that it's like, oh, we get to sleep in and binge watch whatever we want on Netflix. We can travel when we want. We will one day have a little bit more money than if we had had kids. There are those things. And so there are perks, the perks don't outweigh the losses. And it is this weird thing too, that I think I had someone put it best for me. He goes, even with acceptance of the losses and the lifelong grief that you have to go through, and it will never erase the longing. Yeah. And I was like, that's it. So that is why holidays are tough. That is why the due dates of when the babies would have been born are always going to be hard days of the year for me, because it is what could have been. I wonder who they would have been when they, would have turned 3 a couple weeks ago. It's that long. It's what I call it the complicated gray. Nothing is all good or all bad. Nothing is black and white. And God, we really try hard to live in the black and white. But what I am learning is when I embrace what I call the complicated gray, the messy, I find clarity in my truth in that. And so that means that I can be happy and sad all at the same time.
Yeah. And, it just brings you a deeper level of empathy and understanding with your work with other people.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
It really does. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And so, Justine, can you just share with us the best place to find you online?
Yeah, the best place to find me would probably be the blog, which is everupward.org. I also have an Ever Upward Facebook page. I believe it's facebook.com/everupwardblog. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter at Justine Froelker. And those are all the best places to follow, especially because the coloring journal will be out in a couple weeks. So I'm not quite sure. We don't have an official launch date for that because I've never published something through this means yet. And so I'm hoping it will be out in a couple weeks. So just to stay, up to date on what I have going on or what the next project is, that's probably the best place is the blog.
Well, great. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing the book.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Unclassified